of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I have to say, I'm going to look forward to being back in person, because the pledge is much more exciting when we're all really there together. Okay, do we have any oral communication? I'm sorry, do we have any changes to the agenda?
No changes.
Do we have any oral communications?
We do have 2 oral communications tonight. Our first is Carol Parker, and I will unmute Carol Parker. And Carol Parker, you have 3 minutes to address the commission, and you may begin whenever you're ready.
Oh, hello. So anyways, this is Carol Parker, and I'm on the UFAC committee. And one thing that I noticed when we had our Arbor Day, our Encinitas Arbor Day, was we didn't have as many people interested in planting a tree as I thought would. And so I was thinking of ways that the Encinitas could be more active in getting people to be, think about environmentalism a little more. And I thought a really simple thing was joining the Wyland, the Wyland Foundation National Mayor's Challenge for Water Conservation. And it just went through April, and Oceanside actually won for the size of its city. It just gives people in the city to give a chance to get a pledge, and then they can win prizes, or the city can win prizes. And so it's sort of like a fun, easy, cheap thing to do to encourage environmentalism. And that's basically all I would like to say.
Thank you very much, Carol Parker. Our next speaker is Gerald Kessler. I do not see her on the line yet, and she may think that we begin at 6 like the council meetings. So maybe we can come back to Gerald Kessler later in the meeting. And that concludes oral communications.
Thanks, Chamomile. And I'll just say to Carol, send me an email with the program, and we'll take a look. Thank you so much for bringing that to our attention.
Okay.
For those of you who don't know Carol's an awesome member of the Urban Forestry Advisory Committee. Okay, do we have any presentations? No. Would anybody like to make a motion to approve the May 13 minutes? Commissioner Bisconnor is making a motion. Anybody second?
Second.
Commissioner Adams, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, we have approved minutes. Looks like we have no informational items, so we can move to action item 8A, and we can welcome Crystal, who we always love hearing from. Hi, Crystal.
Thank you, Commissioner Novi. And let me just share my screen here. Second. Okay, minimize you all. Okay, oh, let me just switch that. Okay, can you all see that? Oh no, I just.
It looks great.
Yeah, looks good.
Can you see the full screen or the notes slides?
Just the full screen.
Okay, great. Thank you, commissioners, for having me here tonight. The item before you is related to the proposed green building ordinance that has been developed and drafted by city staff and our consultants with the support of some public input that I will go into detail about. So let me just dive right in. So the recommended action for this item is to consider and provide input on the draft ordinance. And then if you so wish, to take action to recommend to City Council that they hear and adopt the ordinance. And so with me here tonight is Mark Deline, our Assistant City Manager, and Jasmine Kraus, the city's Civic Spark Fellow for this year. And then our Our consultant team, the Energy Policy Initiative Center, we have Scott Anders, the director, Mark Steele, the technical policy analyst, and Joe Katz, their staff attorney. And so just to give you a little bit of background, the reason this ordinance is coming before you tonight is because it incorporates several measures from our climate action plan. It implements them by way of this ordinance. And if you recall, the climate action plan that the city has, it was established to develop and implement policies, programs, and projects to reduce greenhouse gas emissions throughout our city. And the pie chart here is just a little reminder of our original baseline inventory of greenhouse gas emissions that's in our climate action plan. A little over half of it comes from transportation, but another good majority, chunk of it, not majority, comes from natural gas and electricity, about 25, about 35, 40, almost 40% comes from those two sectors. And those two sectors also make up our building related emissions for the city. And that is what this ordinance is focused on, is really those two pieces of the pie, the green piece and the blue piece, natural gas and electricity. And to dive a little deeper into just listing out here, the building related CAP measures are, as you see here on the screen, there is 8 of them total. 3 of them have actually already been adopted and incorporated into the city's code. That's RE2 related to residential solar, and the bottom 2 related to EV charging stations. And then the 5 remaining measures are what have been incorporated into the draft ordinance that is before you tonight. And we'll dive deeper into those and go over the whole ordinance with you. And I did want to share that one of the requirements of doing an ordinance like this that involves what is called a REACH code, when a code goes beyond, a local code goes beyond the state building codes, that's called a REACH code. And in order to do that, a city is also required to demonstrate that those measures are actually cost effective for that applicant to implement. And so we did do that analysis. We actually were able to rely on existing studies that have been completed throughout the state, and one just up the road was completed by the city of Carlsbad. So I just, the table that is on this screen shows the different sections of the ordinance and how those cost effectiveness studies relate to each of those sections. And all of these studies were attached to your item for the agenda so that you could review them as part of the item. They're also available on the city's website at that link at the bottom of the screen. And then next I wanted to share the process that we went through to develop the draft ordinance. We conducted a fairly extensive public outreach process to get to where we're at with the draft before you. We started off around February with an initial public workshop, kind of kickoff workshop. And from there, we developed a stakeholder group that actually dove a little deeper into the proposed recommended measures and helped develop the specific language that ended up going into the draft. So that group met a couple times, and then based on the input heard there, staff and our consultant developed the draft ordinance and then presented it at a second workshop about a month ago. About a month ago, maybe 6 weeks ago, we held that workshop. And then at the same time, we opened up a public comment period and received additional public comments on that draft version from the public. And then staff evaluated those comments. We were still evaluating those comments, and in conjunction wanted to take the ordinance to Environmental Commission to also get your input before we make any kind of final changes before we go to Environmental Commission, or sorry, go to Council with the final recommendation. So that leads us to where we are here tonight at Environmental Commission. And then staff plans to take the final draft ordinance to council in August for the 2 readings before it hopefully will get adopted by council. And I wanted to share some of the stakeholder and public input that we received. The stakeholder group that we had ended up being fairly large. We had 13 members, including one of the environmental commissioners. Christian Adams was a participant in the group, and we did some I don't know, I'll back up a little bit and share that we had kind of a partial draft developed before we started down this path. So items 1 and 2 here that you see on the screen were actually already in draft form. And then item 3, the electrification portion, was actually had not been drafted yet. And the stakeholder group was really able to help kind of staff and our consultants kind of think through what that might look like in the ordinance. So some revisions that were made, I won't go through all these, but some revisions that were made were related to, as it relates to solar PV, allowing exceptions for greenhouses and allowing exceptions for facade improvement, allowing a green power compliance alternative. And then for non-residential energy efficiency, we made some modifications there to the ordinance as it relates to the performance standards. This was actually a fairly, I'll say, complicated part of the ordinance. And to simplify it, we kept kind of a portion of it, but omitted the performance standards, which were a bit onerous. And then we also realized that part of this section was duplicative of the solar PV requirements in the other section. So we ended up removing that portion as well. And then finally, for this portion, we opted to have this section only be applicable to existing buildings, so not new construction, because the new section that we added as it relates to building electrification only applies to new buildings. So we felt like that was a good balance between kind of hitting all the different building types and sectors. And so to move on to this third section that was added, building electrification, kind of one of the main decision points here kind of boils down to which of the different appliances in buildings do we want to require to be electric only, and which ones should we allow exceptions for? So there was a lot of dialogue and discussion about that in the stakeholder meetings and also in the public workshops. And ultimately, what we landed on here generally, and what EPIC will go into in more detail, is that what is going to be required to be electric only are water heaters, heating and air conditioning, clothes drying, and indoor fireplaces. And then the exceptions will be around cooking, pools and spas, outdoor fireplaces, central water heating for just multifamily. And then restaurants have a limited exclusion based on how they cook the food. So if they require a flame to actually cook the food, like for example, a pizza oven, then that would, we've allowed an exception for that. And then finally, as it relates to our housing needs, we decided to allow an exception for ADUs. And that, again, this was all based on what we heard in the stakeholder group and from the public. And then moving on, we held the public comment period, and we received some good input there as well. We had we received 4 comments in support. We received 11 comments in support, but with revisions, and then 3 that were opposed. And I will say that the majority of the requests for the revisions were related to the exceptions to the building electrification portion. So there seems to be a lot of interest to maybe not have so many exceptions. And so that is being heard by staff. There was also some interest to prioritize energy efficiency. But we also heard some support for the exception for cooking appliances, that's something that some people were glad to see in the ordinance and still wanted to have gas ranges be an option. There was concern for loss of freedom of choice of appliances, and there was also some interest to provide rebates and incentives. And I will note, and in regards to that point, we did hear the same thing in the stakeholder group and from the public as well. So Jasmine Krause, a little later in our presentation, will share our plans for revamping our green building incentive program to offer more rebates and incentives for energy efficiency measures and different appliances that are electric. So I wanted to share, just because the building electrification and the exceptions that were included in the ordinance were kind of one of the primary topics that ended up being kind of discussed within the public comments. I wanted to share kind of how those exceptions break down as it relates to the natural gas usage of each of the building types. So these first two columns on the far left are related to residential buildings, and in the green, you'll see that is what the ordinance will be requiring to be electric, and then the exceptions and what will be allowed to be natural gas are in the blue. So it's for residential, it's just the cooking appliances and the pool and spa that would be allowed to be natural gas. And then moving on to the middle, multifamily residential is where we do allow an exception for water heating for those centralized boilers that we heard from stakeholders that those can be a bit challenging to convert to electric, and that was an exception that was of interest to that sector. So, but as you can see by the percentages, that does make up 52% of the natural gas usage of the multifamily sector, whereas with the exceptions for residential, the ordinance would actually be eliminating about 88% of the natural gas usage. So a little bit of a difference there. And then lastly, on the far right side, we've diagrammed out the restaurant exception, and that is just only for the appliances. But of course, the cooking appliances in a restaurant is a large majority of the natural gas usage. So again, this would just be a limited exception, not for all restaurants. And then I wanted to go over how the anticipated greenhouse gas emissions that will be avoided based on this ordinance compares to what we targeted in our climate action plan. So this table shows the 5 different measures that are incorporated in the ordinance, and then how the emissions avoided compares to what we originally calculated out as the target. And as you can see, it's really the only differences come into play in BE3, where we're actually a little bit under where we had hoped to reach. However, I will note that in BE4, with the electrification of the new commercial buildings, even though we've noted there that the 97 MT CO2e there is actually a minimum, what we calculated for the cap was kind of a very conservative estimate, and we anticipate that that our emissions reductions from the requirements for electrification of new commercial buildings will actually get us more emissions avoided than the 97. So we're pretty much on par with what we had targeted as goals in our climate action plan with this ordinance. Okay, so with that, I will stop sharing and I will let Epic share to dive a little deeper into the ordinance.
All right, hi, my name is Joe Cates. I'm the staff attorney at the Energy Policy Initiative Center, here to share with you an overview of the proposed ordinance and the provisions therein. I'll follow up on what Crystal said about the building standards. They're adopted in a 3-year code cycle. We're currently in the 2019 code cycle. It went into effect January 1, 2020. The general trend in the state is towards electrification, decarbonization of new buildings. There's a lot of R&D money going to this. There's PUC funded programs around this, and things looking at what to do with natural gas infrastructure in terms of cost over time as things electrify. So it's part of state policy, and the state is taking it slow with local governments leading the way in many respects. So Encinitas is proposing a REACH code that goes beyond the state energy building standard. And so they have to demonstrate that it's at least as stringent as a statewide code in terms of energy consumption, and that is cost effective. So what we're talking about today is, as Crystal relayed to you, is residential, non-residential buildings. I'll just run you through. So the residential buildings we're talking about: single family, low family, multifamily. So that's 3 stories or less. The energy efficiency component is the thresholds that cause the requirements to deal with alterations and additions at a specific cost threshold for the project. And then electrification is for all new construction. So it includes new construction, existing, and then because solar PV is already mandated for low-rise residential by state code, it's already part of your code. So non-residential, we're talking about commercial buildings, hotel, motel, and high-rise residential, so 4 stories and taller. So again, there's alterations and additions for existing buildings that have an energy efficiency requirement, and then new construction. And then there's a PV requirement that affects new construction, and then alterations and additions at thresholds that we'll go over in a second. So we'll start with the existing residential energy efficiency requirements. So it applies to all existing residential alterations and additions with a permit value of $50,000 or greater. You comply by choosing with one of the required options. The options are determined by the age of the building, and this is based on what is, what's specific to the city of Encinitas, and also the age or the vintage of the building. So certain things aren't cost effective based on the age of the building. So this gives you an idea of what it looks like. For attic insulation, we're looking at that would apply to a building that's pre-1978. So that's prior to the building codes being in effect in the state. If you're a pre-1978 building and you trigger the requirement, then you have 2 options. You pick one about duct sealing and venting, or doing a cool roof. This also applies to buildings built between 1978 and 1990. The water heating package and the lighting package are options for for permits and buildings that are 1978 or after, or 1991 or after. And this is what it looks like diagrammed out. So there's a couple exceptions we'll go over. So you see, starting in the top, if it's $50,000 or greater, if the building has a HERS score of 7 or higher, then it's automatically exempted from this requirement. We'll move down to the left side of it for multifamily before 1978. So buildings that already have existing R5 or greater insulation would be exempted from this for the attic insulation. Exceptions, there's another exception if the building isn't conditioned. And this is something somewhat unique to Encinitas, where there's a lot of unconditioned residential housing. And if you're not intending to condition it, there's not really a reason to add attic insulation in that respect. So moving over to single family before 1978, multifamily 1970 and 1990, you see the 2 duct ceilings or coal roofs as the option. Single family 1978 or after, multifamily 1991 or after. You see the lighting package or the water heating package, and these, for lighting package, it's screw-in LEDs that replace existing lighting, and then vacancy sensors. For water heating, it's about insulating the water heater, insulating the pipes, as much of the piping as you can coming out of the water heater for hot water, and then upgrading sinks and showers to decrease flow rates. And so the water savings equates to energy savings in that respect. Moving on to non-residential energy efficiency requirements. It applies to non-residential, certain multi-unit residential and hotel motels. So the thresholds that trigger this requirement is the addition of 1,000 square feet or more, or an alteration with a permit value of at least $200,000. It has 3 components to it, and depending on the scope of the project, certain parts apply. So there's an energy efficiency component. This is the prerequisite component, and the performance component was taken out of this. As Crystal previously mentioned, there's a component for elevators, escalators, and others equipment about regenerative systems and saving energy on these types of build outs. And then with steel framing, have efficient steel framings. And then as Crystal already mentioned, the renewable energy and the green tariff requirements were removed because of SDCP launching and the PV requirement. So to comply, it's calling for a Calgary Tier 1 prerequisite requirement where you comply by having at least one of the following measures as applicable to your project, whether it's outdoor lighting. If you're a restaurant, there's a service water heating requirement. If it's a warehouse, there's dock seal door requirements. If it's adjacent to conditioned space, and then there's a daylight design power adjustment. This is daylight harvesting or skylights to save on lighting costs. All right, so elevators, escalators, and other equipment. So if there's more than one elevator or 2 escalators in the project, using a regenerative drive system while the elevator or escalator is in motion, turning off lights and fans automatically until the elevator is called. These controls must meet energy reduction requirements and not interrupt emergency operations. In terms of steel framing, again, it's coming out of the Cal Green standard. So it's exterior rigid insulation, punching large holes in the stud web without affecting structural integrity of the studs, spacing the studs as far apart as possible and maintaining structural integrity, and detailed design of intersection of wall openings and building intersections of floor walls and roofs to create energy efficiency savings. And so diagrammed out, this is what it looks like. See, going down, addition of 1,000 square feet or $200,000, moving down to have all buildings with lighting or mechanical systems would be covered by this. You see the elevator and escalator and framing out on the side and the Tier 1 prerequisites as applicable to the project. And then there is an exception on the outdoor lighting, and where the color temperature requirement is not applicable if the applicant identifies the exception under the existing code or a specific application right already in the existing code where they're basically compliant with this requirement already. Moving on to non-residential PV. So this applies to all new non-residential, certain multi-unit residential and hotel motel. And in the existing built environment is additions that increase total roof area by at least 1,000 square feet, or alterations with a permit value of at least $1 million that effectively 75% of gross floor space. So in terms of sizing the PV, this is how the requirement works. There's 2 ways of sizing it. There's a gross floor area component that's based on the size of the building. So if you're less than 10,000 square foot building, you have a minimum 5 kilowatt DC nameplate requirement. If you're over 10,000 square feet or over, it's the minimum of 15 kilowatts DC per 10,000 square feet. And there's a calculation for that to determine how the amount of solar that you need based on your load or the size of the building, which is correlated with the load of the building. There's also a time-dependent valuation where you must offset 80% of your annual time-dependent energy value over a year. So those are the 2 ways of complying. The pathway, this is what it looks like diagrammed out. So you see all new, it's going into that depending on what the applicant chooses to do, right? They have the 2 choices in terms of PV for sizing the system gross floor or time dependent. You see the additions of 1,000 square feet, the permit valuation. And one important component in terms of the exceptions that came out of the stakeholder process was to exclude aesthetic only exterior alterations from the permit value. And so these are alterations to improve the facade. It doesn't deal with health and safety. It's not touching the floor or the conditioned space. And so that was one of the things to continue to not put a barrier in front of that investment in terms of maintaining these buildings. And some of the other exceptions, it's about infeasibility or the practical challenges, whether it's structural integrity of the roof, it's shading from vegetation or buildings that doesn't make it cost effective to put PV on, those types of things. There's an alternative for on-site renewable if as technology advances. This is forward-looking, so if there's wind or some other what's deemed renewable energy technology to comply with it that comes in the future, this would allow for that as an exception. Commercial greenhouses are taken out because why would you put solar on a greenhouse? The commercial greenhouses just doesn't make any sense. And then if you have procured the highest content renewable energy available in the city of Encinitas, then if you're on that tariff, you don't have to put PV on your roof because you're already going to be pulling 100% renewable energy under that tariff. And then you would just give that to the planning department, and that's how you would say that you're in compliance with this part of the code. And with SDCP launching at 100% renewable energy from the get-go, everybody is compliant from that standpoint as all of the customers enroll. If they come off of it, they can go back onto it. And so it's utilizing the CCA component and what it provides in terms of reducing emissions. Moving on to new residential and non-residential electrification. So it applies to all new residential, non-residential, including mixed use portion of those buildings, certain multi-unit residential, and hotels and motels. So what it does is it defines all electric and provides exceptions by building type. This was the chosen pathway to try and make the code simple to both applicants to understand and also to implement on the planning and enforcement side by the city. So this is the definition of an all-electric building as proposed. It's a building that has no natural gas, propane, plumbing installed within the building. There's no gas meter connection. That uses electricity as the source of energy for space heating, water heating, cooking appliances, and clothes drying appliances. All electric buildings may include solar thermal pool heating. So it allows natural gas in use with electric ready. So if you fall under one of the exceptions, you have to pre-wire that space for an all-electric stovetop or whatever the end use would be. And so in terms of exceptions for new residential, so all building types, single family, multifamily, low rise, high rise. So cooking appliance are an exception, pool and spa, outdoor fireplaces. So this also aligns with what Crystal showed you earlier in terms of like where the natural gas end use is and where electrification is really driving the reductions of emissions from natural gas. So new residential, multifamily, low rise and high rise, where there's a common centralized water heating, that would be an exception. And this is partially an equity component about the cost of electricity versus centralized water heating, and also just how these buildings function, where they have a central, common water heating to serve those units, as opposed to space heating, which is going to be in each individual unit. Essential facilities, so these are things that are designed to survive earthquakes and catastrophic events. So they're accepted. Accessory dwelling units are accepted, and this was partially because of the housing element requirement for the city, and feedback from stakeholders about how, in terms of designing these structures and what you do about it, like some of the difficulties of complying with the heightened standards, and there was cost savings by not pulling natural gas into it, but there's other expenses in terms of how the things are designed based on what the stakeholders told us. So this is the definition out of your existing code about what an ADU is. Technically only detached buildings are new construction but your definition covers both attached and detached. And then again, what Crystal said, this is new for-profit restaurants, so they have to submit the business-related reason for the flame. It cannot be reasonably achieved by an electric source. They have employed reasonable methods to mitigate the greenhouse gas impacts from the natural gas fueled appliances, so other efficiency measures on the building or PV on the roof, those types of things. And it's pre-wired for electric appliance wherever natural gas is used. And again, it applies to walks, barbecue places, other things, pizza ovens, things that are traditionally and need flames for what the for-profit restaurants are using it for. So diagrammed out, this is what it looks like. You can see how you come down. If you meet the all electric, then you're complying with the all electric components of the existing code under the 2009 triennial code cycle. And you can see how the exceptions work. And where the exceptions are in play, it has to be pre-wired again, and then they have to comply with the existing code for Title 24. And that's it. So happy to take questions, feedback.
And then next, we'll just go to Jasmine real quickly so that I'll share that part of the presentation. Just a second here. Okay, so Jasmine is going to share. So one of the things that we heard from the stakeholders and the public is that in addition to the ordinance, they wanted to see the city also encouraging those that come in, not necessarily needing a permit, but encouraging those that have existing homes to actually retrofit their homes and make them more energy efficient and install electric appliances. So one way we realized we could do that is through our existing green building incentive program. We can actually revise that and kind of work those things in. So that's what Jasmine is going to share about. Just a second.
Great, thanks, Crystal.
Yeah.
Yeah, so my name is Jasmine Kress, and I'll be talking about the Green Building Incentive Program today. I'll give you a brief overview about what the program currently looks like, and then some of the changes that we're looking to make. So the existing program, basically applicants can get certified either under Build It Green's Green Point rated standard or the US Green Building Council's Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design LEED standard. Once you get this certification, the incentive covers that cost up to $2,000, as well as gives your project priority permit processing through the city. And then you'll also get project recognition at a city council meeting. The program isn't currently also being very well utilized. It's not particularly popular, so we're also looking to help expand its use and encourage more engagement with it through these proposed revisions. So the main addition we're looking at making is adding on an item-based rebate. Here are the items that we're currently looking at adding this rebate for. So windows, insulation, cooking appliances, HVAC units, water heaters, clothes dryers, variable speed pool pumps, and pool covers. We have various requirements for these. They're all focused on ensuring that they're energy efficient or decarbonizing to sort of complement the draft ordinance that we've been discussing. So a lot of the common requirements here are that they're Energy Star rated, that they're heat pump or electric. You can also see, like for a pool cover, that the cover would cover over 85% of the pool surface, specific standards for insulation and for windows as well. And then some of the rebate amounts that we've listed from research of comparable programs in other cities. So how this new change would basically be implemented, we're thinking is you could have one rebate per item type per address for every 5 years. So at one address, you can get one induction cooktop rebate in 5 years. You can't have multiple. This is just to ensure that it's fair, that everyone has a chance to utilize the program. Or if you don't use that rebate, you could get the LEED or BIG certification rebate at a given address. And we are also considering limiting the number of these rebates that are provided each year, as they're currently very underutilized, and to shift the focus more to the item-based rebates, as those would be more accessible to everyday people. And then just some general structure for the item-based rebates, how this would function. It's only applicable to existing buildings, so new construction can't come in and get rebates on all these appliances when they're installing them. It needs to replace existing gas equipment to help push our building decarbonization goals. It would require use of a contractor with an Encinitas business license. This basically just to check that the contractor is registered with the city like they're supposed to be. And then an additional requirement that the application for the incentive in this rebate is submitted within 3 months of purchase. We also have been thinking about some future possible revisions. So not that they'll be added in this round, but things to consider for the future include the possibility of adding a zero net energy certification. So this looks at a building and certifies that it is meeting all of its energy goals with on-site renewable energy, and that there is no incineration of natural gas going on. The pros of adding this kind of certification is it aligns with the CAP's greenhouse gas reduction goals. It would make sure that they are reducing emissions in the building sector. But some of the cons with this is the certification is very costly for the applicant, and it's a very lengthy process. It usually requires about a year of monitoring your utility bills so that you can actually have proof for the certification that there is zero net energy basically in your home. We're also looking at possibly adding a home energy assessment program. So an opportunity for an expert to go out into your home and check what possible upgrades or improvements need to be made so that your home could be more energy efficient. Here, similar pros, you would be increasing energy efficiency, meeting emissions reduction goals and helping that along, as well as providing occupant cost savings with greater efficiency measures. Some cons to this would be program costs and implementation could be difficult on the city side. And then just to address the outreach and education portion of these changes to the Green Building Incentive Program, we do plan to advertise the changes to the incentive program, make sure that everyone knows that this rebate will, when it's available, what is covered, what kind of documents do they have to provide, really making that accessible and well known to people. We're also looking at providing a lot of education regarding this new draft ordinance, making sure everyone understands what is happening with the ordinance, what is and isn't allowed. And also just increasing our training for planners, plan checkers, developers, and applicants to make sure that our adopted ordinances are being implemented correctly.
Okay, so that gets us to, am I on mute? I can't tell if I'm muted or not. Hopefully everyone can hear me. That gets us to, that wraps up our presentation. And I'm just on this last slide here sharing the recommended action to consider and provide input on the draft ordinance. And then if you so choose, take an action to recommend that City Council hear and adopt the ordinance.
Thanks, Crystal. And just to clarify something procedurally, so you're deviating a little bit from the original plan, which was to come to the commission immediately before going to the council. So you're looking for us to make comments and approve, I guess, with comments attached to that approval, if there are such, and then not come back to the commission, after any other additional comments, received, and go straight to the council, after whatever the intermediary step is.
Yes, that's correct. That's the hope tonight, that there's enough of a support that even if it's support with comments, that's what I could bring to council and share, that that Environmental Commission supported it as long as these changes were made, or supported it as it's written. Of course, your choice, but yes, that's correct.
Okay, thank you so much. And then I don't think we have any public comments on this specific agenda item, but I want to make sure.
We
Camille.
certainly do.
Oh, we do?
Yes, we had 6, now we have 5.
Okay.
And I do see our speaker from item 4, oral communications, Gerald Kessler. Unless you switched camps and would like to speak on item 8A, I'll check in with Gerald Kessler now.
Sure. Yeah, and I would definitely say we should hear from all the public comments before we commence with discussion.
Thank you. And Gerald Kessler has left the meeting. So I will start with our first speaker for item 8A, which is Harold Standifer. And Mr. Standifer, you have 3 minutes to address the commission, and you may start whenever you're ready.
Thank you. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Oh, terrific. I wanted to speak to the exceptions contained in the proposed ordinance. I've got some concerns about the exception to exclude the ADUs. It doesn't seem to make a lot of sense to exclude them when we're requiring the electrification components for the other new construction. So I would argue against the ADU exception. I'm also concerned about the exception for cooking. The information that's available on the negative impact of using gas indoors for indoor air pollution is particularly stunning and readily available. And I would argue against that exception. Their induction cooktops are a terrific way to cook, and they should be strongly considered. I would just also remind that the City Council and the Commission has taken action to declare a climate emergency. And I think that the actions they take should be considered in that light. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Standifer. Our next speaker is Joe Gabaldon. And
Their call.
Joe, you have,
Computer just died.
uh-oh, I can hear you. You have 3 minutes to address the commission whenever you're ready.
Okay, great. Sorry, I put in the wrong speaker slip. So I'm just monitoring tonight.
Oh,
thank
wonderful.
you so much.
Thank you so much for joining us. Our next speaker is Kelly Linden, and I will give Kelly a chance to speak. Kelly, you have 3 minutes to address the commission whenever you're ready.
All right, can you hear me?
Yes, we can, perfectly.
Awesome. Well, I wanted to applaud the City of Encinitas for its efforts to address the climate emergency by reducing natural gas usage in new buildings. And I'm glad to hear that you're still considering the public input that's been given. I want to urge you to look really closely at the building electrification exceptions. For each and every one of them separately, understand the rationale for why that particular exception is there, what the impact is to have that there, and just how broad-based the ask was. Because if one person brought it up, is that really enough to have that exception included? It is a climate emergency. A lot of the exceptions are about luxury items and emotional attachments and not about functional needs. So, I think we really have to be thinking about the climate emergency driving those decisions. The other piece of it is just the costs. Every exception means that new gas infrastructure will be built out and placed into new buildings. And it's going to lead to future stranded assets. It's a waste of money. It's a source of potential leaks and maintenance. And the remaining gas customers are going to have to foot the bill. So, we really need to stop putting gas infrastructure in new buildings, and this is the time to do it. So I appreciate the efforts you're doing, and I would appreciate you taking a look very closely at each and every one of those exceptions. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly Linden. Our next speaker is former Commissioner James Wong. James Wong, you have 3 minutes to address the Environmental Commission.
Okay, thank you, Camille.
You're welcome.
I just want to say, first of all, it's been a while since I've seen your friendly face. I miss it. So going to you. Good evening, commissioners. Just a quick question before I start. Do alumni of this commission get extra points when speaking on this side of the podium? Just kidding.
Yes.
Now, okay. I'm asking you to please remember our climate emergency and do not accept this ordinance with exceptions. Because an ordinance with exceptions is like taking a bike tire and then punching holes in it. So let me explain. We have a climate emergency. You approved it last year, and then so did the council. In doing so, you and the council acknowledge that, and I quote, urgent and emergency action is imperative. So urgent emergency action doesn't mean business as usual, and doesn't mean catering to personal preferences, such as cooking. Now, the council understands our climate emergency, so that's why they chose Power 100 for default power mix. They felt that lower GHGs are important, even if it's at a higher cost. But this case is even simpler. It's not an either or between lower GHGs and lower costs. You get both lower GHGs and lower costs with all electric, no exceptions. It's not just me saying that, it's a cost effectiveness study that's in your packet. Furthermore, the study notes non-preemptive options. By the way, those are installations that exceed federal minimums are, and I quote, the simplest and most affordable measures to increase energy performance. The study also found that, and I quote again, all electric design reduces GHG emissions 40 to 50% relative to mixed fuel design. Conversely, oil and gas will raise both GHGs and cost. A sidebar, you also eliminate egregious health hazards if you get rid of gas stoves. Now consider, our climate emergency is huge compared to our recent COVID emergency. So we have to respond boldly and with alacrity. If COVID was a bike race around the block, our climate emergency is more like the Tour de France. So why should we punch holes in our bike tires? Let's not do that. Please eliminate the exceptions from this ordinance. By doing so, you will demonstrate your environmental expertise and show that you are taking this emergency seriously as it should be taken. Thank you.
Thank you, James Wong. Our next speaker is Peter Davis. Peter Davis, you have 3 minutes to address the commission whenever you're ready.
Okay, thank you. You can hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, yes, I would like to support the previous comments and encourage, ongoing evaluation of each of the exceptions. I'm encouraged that that process is still ongoing, it seems. So I'm not sure how the Environmental Commission interacts in that process, but I think the points made about cooking are well taken. I think the health impacts are quite serious. Can you still hear me, or did you lose me? I had to unmute again.
We did lose you for a second. I apologize. Continue on.
What was the last thing I said?
I heard the health consequences of indoor.
Okay, yeah, so the health consequences of cooking. The other piece is that, most people, I think I don't have the source, but 92% of people once, previous gas cooktop users, once they experience induction, they are happy with the technology. So I think that's worth exploring. As far as, pools and spas and outdoor fireplaces, I mean, I think if someone has to go with an indoor fireplace that's electric, an outdoor fireplace won't be that big a challenge. Neither of them is superior to a real fire, which we probably can't do anyways either. So I don't think that should be an exception. I think the ADUs, I learned a little something more about that. Some concerns may have been if someone's doing an attached ADU, then they want to, then it's not really much of a problem to put in the gas. But if it's a non-attached one, that seemingly you should not allow new gas infrastructure. I think that the points made by Kelly Linden about stranded assets and costs as the system winds down being borne by people that remain on the system, most likely low income, is very concerning. And I think that needs to be looked at closely. I'd also be curious about the volume of permits per month that are anticipated to be affected in the first several months of rollout, because it may be a small amount and people will be happier a year after this process, and the climate crisis, you know, becomes even more severe because that's the direction it's going. And I think that was it. I really appreciate Crystal and the staff and EPIC for all the work that they're putting into this effort. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. That concludes speakers for item 8A. We do have Gerald Kessler on the line for item 4, oral communications. And I will give Gerald Kessler a chance to speak now.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. You have 3 minutes to address the commission. Thank you.
Okay, this isn't about what they're talking about right now, so.
That's fine. I'm sorry we missed you for item 4.
I couldn't get on at 5:30. I don't know. It kept spinning, but all right, I'm gonna just make it fast.
Thank you.
Sorry about that. So here we go. Let me just get my little thing. Okay, I understand that you have no authority over this nightmare housing element that is being put forth on the community, but I still would like to share with you about this Staver project on Melba that is slated to put up 31 homes and tear down that historical home built in 1938, plus tear down a grove of Torrey pines and 200 trees. Our neighborhood group. Okay. Can I keep talking? Somebody, I'm hearing somebody. Can I keep talking or no?
Yes, please, Gerald Kessler. I'm sorry. I'm timing you and you have plenty of time. We had some.
Okay, alrighty.
Go ahead, dear. I'm sorry.
Alrighty. Our working neighborhood group reached out to talk to Brian Staver, who is the owner and developer of the land on Melba. We met with him on his property. Although he's very approachable and well-mannered, he just does not understand the significance of this beautiful piece of property that his family holds and the incredible ecosystem the property has to offer the entire Encinitas community. The tree line can be seen almost the entire length of Melba Road. And he just does not get it. And that saddens me even more. He's clearly not an environmentalist, and quite possibly that trait may have skipped a generation. This environmental conscious gene that was ever present in the prior family members who lived on the land and in the area is not present with him. He's not passionate about preserving this land for the neighborhood and has never even considered what sadness it brings us all, knowing that 31 homes will be placed on it. While talking with Brian on the property, we saw several monarch butterflies and beautiful birds that were nesting there. They're always there. Anyway, my hope is that the mayor and the council will help the community preserve this land. The property abuts Oak Crest School, Boys and Girls Club, and the community center, which will be drastically impacted by those 31 homes. I asked the mayor and council last night to look for ways for the community could work in preserving the property and to please find federal government money for this, if any is out there, or perhaps money from the Parks and Recs could budget this to assist with the preservation of this property. It was also an ideal location for the botanical gardens or community gardening on-site lab. Anyway, I know you guys don't have any power, but I just thought I'd share that because you're talking about environmental issues and most of these developers could care less about the environment. And that is saddening to me that they're getting to put all these homes due to this density bonus laws. It's just not right. Okay, thanks for listening.
Thank you, Gerald Kessler. Thank you for your patience. That concludes speakers for this evening.
Thank you, Chamomile, and thank you to all of our speakers. I think we can open this up to commissioners if anybody has any questions or comments for Crystal and the staff.
Yeah, hi, I see that Commissioner Morris has his hand up. I can let him go first. Sorry, I don't want to go out of turn.
Commissioner Morris, sure.
Hi there, Commissioner Morrison. I participated in the stakeholder group as a developer from my current job as a multifamily developer, and also collaborated with a retail developer who owns the majority of the shopping centers in Encinitas. And I wanted to support the way that this ordinance has come across. Crystal and staff and the team really worked with us to make sure that the exceptions were fitting with how they need to continue to operate business, as well as bring new businesses into the community as restaurants and retail change over. So I know a lot of our speakers spoke to removing any of the exceptions, but as it stands for any of the exceptions for multifamily housing, as well as retail, I would be opposed to any changes to that at this point in time. And I'm done.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Kramer.
Thanks, Chair Novi. Thank you so much to city staff. Thanks to Crystal, Joe, and Jasmine for all of your efforts putting together this draft ordinance and for your great presentations. That was a really nice, clear explanation. I would like to support kind of taking a deeper look at these exceptions for the all electric requirements for the new buildings. Several of them appear very broad, overly broad, and I think we could make them a little more targeted. So I would support, having a discussion, taking a look at clarifying, sort of narrowing and or eliminating some of them before we recommend City Council consider this.
Commissioner Adams?
First of all, kudos to Crystal. Great job in the 3 or 4 meetings that we had. You kept them all on time, which was amazing. I don't know how you did that. And so this went through a very thorough process, as Commissioner Morrison just spoke about. I think they did a good job of incorporating all the stakeholders' kind of concerns. Whether I agree with them or not, but that's what I think came from this is everybody's kind of voice was kind of heard. So I'd ask, I don't know if it's appropriate to do this here, but Commissioner Kramer, what exceptions specifically did you have concern with? Do you know?
Yeah, thanks for that, Commissioner Adams. Is this an appropriate time to have this discussion? Just being a newbie council?
Yes, we can talk about anything we want to talk about.
Okay, great. Yeah, so exception 1, the gas cooking for residential homes really kind of takes the teeth out of it and seems to not adequately reflect the goals stated in the city's climate emergency and the updated environmental policy documents that call for cleaning the air, reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So making that not a requirement for new residential buildings will, like some of the speakers said, encourage the laying down of new gas lines. And it's, increasingly becoming aware of the public health issue associated with the indoor pollution caused by the gas ranges. So that is one that I feel like we could take another look at. Exception 2, not being part of the public kind of input process of this, but was not very clear to me what these essential facilities are and why having gas versus electric would be necessary, especially if it was mentioned that these facilities might be built to withstand earthquakes and other catastrophes. Gas would be more dangerous. We've seen what happens when gas leaks and causes, huge damage to life and property. So I'm not quite clear about that exception. So maybe just clarifying some of the wording would help too in the ordinance. The exception 3 for ADUs, the point was made that, so if the ADU is new, but the residential building is not new, so maybe it's an attached ADU. So that might make sense if the existing main building has gas hookups, then you would want to harmonize the ADU with that. But if it's a new ADU for a new building, it doesn't really make sense to not require electrification for that ADU. And then the exception 5 for the multi-family buildings, I'm not quite clear how that would be kind of an economic equity issue, given that electricity is no more expensive than gas. So that, yeah, maybe just a clarification there for the justification for that would be a good idea. And yeah, those are my main concerns.
So, I mean, I think we can ask those questions of the experts that we have with us today. So I'm hearing a question about what, you know, it's the draft ordinance refers to a pre-existing definition for emergency facilities. So maybe we'll take that one first. And so whoever the right person is to let us know, you know, what is that legal definition and what are the kinds of facilities that are included within that.
Joe, do you mind taking that one?
Sorry, I was still muted. So the definition, it comes out of state code, and it's dealing with facilities that the state deems essential in terms of catastrophic emergencies. And so these are buildings, whether it's public safety power shutoffs with the electricity going off and having a facility that still has natural gas for hot water and things of that nature. These facilities are designed to survive earthquakes and other catastrophic events on the coast. And so that's what it's a high standard by the state to qualify. And if the facility qualifies, the justification for it would be that you want to have every energy source available to keep that facility up when there's a catastrophic event, because that's what it's designed to do. And to not infringe on the state definition of what this facility is and state money that comes in for it. So that's for that one specifically. That's the intent.
Thank you. Thanks. That helps. That's helpful.
Can you give us just a couple examples? I mean, this is like hospitals, you know.
It can be hospitals, it can be fire stations, it can be schools. Things where the state, in order to meet the definition and the standards around it, it's a place where when something catastrophic happens, it's a place that stays up and operational. So it can be any number of types of buildings, but it has to meet the definition and the building requirements to survive catastrophic events.
Thank you. So maybe we'll just, you know, what I heard from Ferris people was questions around especially unattached ADUs. So I think maybe if we can understand the rationale for, you know, for exempting them, what the rationale was for exempting cooking stoves, and then what the rationale is for exempting multifamily water heating. That I think we're just interested in hearing what, you know, really in some detail what the rationale were.
Yeah, and I can take a crack at those other ones and then maybe get some support from EPIC. So the ADUs, I think the real concern there was that the ADUs help to support our housing needs in the city, and we heard that we didn't want to hinder promotion of people adding housing units to our community. So if something like something written in this ordinance were to, you know, make them decide not to build their ADU and not to add that additional unit, then we didn't want to have, you know, that be the block. So that was the rationale there. And then for cooking, this was probably what we heard was kind of one of the most controversial appliances. There's definitely folks on both sides of the camp here. We heard from several people about how much they do like cooking with gas and that they never wanted to, you know, be forced to give up their gas range. I will caveat that we are only looking at new construction. So anyone who has an existing home and an existing gas range, even if they wanted to change it out, would not be required to change it out to electric. We're just looking at new homes here. But that was definitely something we heard, that there seems to be that preference among our community to have a gas range. Although on the flip side, we did hear about the health impacts of indoor cooking, and certainly consider that and know that's a big issue too. And then the last one was the multifamily water heating, and as Jim Morrison mentioned, that was something that was discussed by a couple of the developers that we had participate, and seemed to be something that was of particular concern. Not only did it sound like it potentially could be more costly for the developers to convert the way that they are installing the water heating, but it was also logistically, it is a different way of doing the water heating. Instead of having a centralized boiler in order to do electric water heating, as far as I understand, you actually need to have multiple units. And so the actual design of the building would need to be somewhat different, or at least the plumbing part of it, in order to accommodate this change. So it seemed that it was a fairly significant request, and that it was something that would warrant an exception. So that's the rationale, and where we ended up landing.
Crystal, could I add something? I think we had found out that the residential cooking was only about 8% of the greenhouse gas generation. So it's really very small slice of it. I had thought and there's one thing that Crystal and I hope to do is to educate people very strongly to the hazards of the indoor air pollution. We're thinking of flyers that we could provide, at the building counter when people pull permits, about, do you really want to go with a gas cooktop, and let people know that maybe induction really is the preferred in Europe, and so many chefs really enjoy it, and that, there is definitely an air pollution hazard. Then my understanding on the commercial water heating is that the reheat times are a little bit slower with electric compared to gas, and that is also an issue. But maybe, William Morrison can step in or something if he disagrees with that, but that was my understanding.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. That was helpful.
It's Commissioner Morrison. I can step in for a moment if you would like on the multifamily.
Sure, go ahead.
On multifamily, certain building types, like a garden style, having individual gas water heaters is usually a preference just due to ease of installation. Having the electric water heaters could work, but when we start getting to more complex construction types like a podium with the underground parking garage, the central boiler on the roof is giving that more constant water heating for all the residents. And that is the preferred and more efficient and effective way to provide the service to 200, 300 units at one time. So that is why we asked to have that considered. Thank you.
Thank you. Would it be possible to then kind of further specify different categories of multifamily buildings? So if it is a smaller unit or number of units where it wouldn't add excessive cost to the developer, then the exception doesn't apply. But if it's one of these really large buildings where that central boiler is necessary, then the exception can apply. Can we make these a little bit more, or is that something for city council to do? Just feels like some of these exceptions are just very, very broad at this stage.
Yeah, that's one that you could recommend is if you'd prefer that that if we maybe perhaps bifurcate. It sounds like it might be simpler to have the hot water heating for the low rise and the smaller units, but the high rise is where that's more of a challenge. So that could be where I could see you make a recommendation to make a modification to that exception.
Thanks for that explanation, Crystal.
Commissioner Biscotter?
Yes, thank you, Chair Novi. Yes, yeah, I echo the other Commissioner's praise of Crystal Nahara on this project. It looks like it's been a very thorough process with public review and also Epic and staff. That said, the letters of support that we received and the commentary that we received tonight from both Kelly Linden, Jim Wong, Harold Standifer, and others, they resonate with me. I mean, I think if we're going to transition to electric, for all the reasons that we know it's important to do so, it just seems to me that there's an awful lot of exceptions that are not necessary in this effort. And, since we are now on community choice energy, and Encinitas, I think rightfully so, chose the right package. I think last year when this idea was initially proposed, my main objection or my main question to myself was, are we ready to force ourselves into more electrification? And I think we are now. We have taken that step, and I agree with Ms. Linden's statement that we're going to end up with stranded assets. I mean, why replumb all these buildings with both energy sources when we're really trying to transition out of the old ones? And again, this is not for existing homes, this is for brand new ones. I kind of feel like we need to step into the future and do what we say we're going to do. And of course, Jim's comments about the climate emergency, which we all, I think most of us voted to present to council, which they adopted. Yeah, so some of these things that are just personal preferences, I think, we need to move on. At some point, the cavemen probably didn't like moving away from the campfire. And here we are. I think we all enjoy not having a campfire in our homes. So I would probably not support moving this forward with all of these exceptions.
Commissioner Hausberger.
So thank you, Commissioner Novi and Crystal. This was really a great report. Thank you very much. I have to say that I actually agree with all of the residential. I agree with all the exceptions because, as Crystal just pointed out, or maybe it was Mark pointed out, natural gas stovetop use for cooking in a house is only 8%, right? And I think that some of these exceptions we're looking at are very small. And I do think that people deserve to have personal choice when in their own homes. I really do. I think, public buildings, maybe some of these we can go all electric, but for me, it's a no-go. Like, I only want to cook with gas. I'm one of those. And I know a lot of people that only want to cook with gas. And yes, I have had an electric stove and I do not enjoy cooking on it. So I understand the other health issues, but for me, that's a no-go. I also agree with the exception for the ADUs, even if they are freestanding. We're trying to get as much housing in these neighborhoods as possible. And again, it's a small sliver. I think when we look at this, we're thinking in broad strokes, but in fact, there aren't that many that maybe are going to choose natural gas. The truth is, you give people the choice, and it's not saying you only have to put natural gas in your ADU. It's just it is a choice for those people. So my guess is you'll have a lot that go all electric, but I think limiting it is not okay with me. I appreciate the exceptions, and I think that listening to the public is important. And this is a great initiative. I actually am I was going to suggest another exception because I actually prefer having a fire in my house, and I'm not exactly sure what an electric fireplace is, Crystal, and how much natural gas do fireplaces in our homes actually use. We have very few days that we actually use them in Encinitas. What is that percentage of houses with natural gas fireplaces? Like, what is that? And what is an electric fireplace? Can you answer those questions?
Sorry, I'm switching screens here. Yeah, so there is technology available that it's electric, but it actually has a flame that's kind of produced by water, like a mist, and it looks like a flame, and it produces heat with the electrical components. And so I have not seen one of them myself, but there were stakeholders that talked about them, and they said that they were actually really impressively looked like real fires. So that gave us some confidence that, and especially as you mentioned, since here in Southern California, those appliances aren't necessarily required for actually heating our homes, they're more for aesthetic, that was further justification that if we could, there is something on the market that can still offer that as visual aesthetic without being natural gas, that we thought that was a good substitute. That was the rationale there.
Okay, well, I actually live in an old home, and we do heat our house with our fireplace. Like, we do. I mean, it's part of our keeping our house warm in the winter. But how much does natural gas actually account for in a person's fireplace? Do you guys have that data? I mean, if cooking is 8%, I can't imagine that in Encinitas it would even be 0.5%. I mean, so I guess my thing is it's a really small amount, right?
Yeah, I was just trying to pull that up just a second. So
I think that's a great general question. Like, do we have numbers associated with each of the exemptions? I mean, you presented that we're hitting the proposed plan hits the overall greenhouse gas emission reduction target, under the cap for this item. But I'm wondering if we have a quantification for each exemption, how much additional, carbon equivalent greenhouse gas emission are we foregoing?
Right, and so for that appliance, and maybe Epic, if you have something handy, but what I'm looking at is what we shared and on one of the slides, and we don't have the fireplaces included in residential, but we have a category called other. So it would be under that category, and that was only 1% of natural gas use.
Right, so it's a really small amount.
But you still have to plumb the building with all this gas infrastructure. I think that's kind of the point. Maybe, there are certain items that, yeah, they consume very, very little. I concede that. But you still have to have all that infrastructure to service that very, very small need.
Well, I agree, Ingy, but I think also we have to remember we're a small city. It's not like a house next door to me that's getting built. Yes, we're going to plumb them with gas, but every other house on the street has gas already. So it's not like you're going to remove that, is what I'm saying. So I think it's important we give people choices. And my guess is most people will pick a good variety of these choices, but I think limiting is not the way to go because people, some people are passionate about things, and the truth is others aren't. So you'll get people that say, oh, this is an easy change for me to make, and others, or they'll pick and choose. I feel like you might have said that at one of the meetings, let people pick and choose I remember you saying that, not to put words in your mouth, but I kind of remember that. Anyway, that's my 2 cents.
I think Commissioner Adams has had his hand up for a while.
Thanks, Commissioner Onovi. So I agree with Commissioner Hansberger on that we should pass this with the exceptions, but for different reasons. I don't think that people should have choice. I can't burn tires in my backyard to heat my home because it's not good for the environment. I do think from a political standpoint, this has gone from, you know, I just this the whole choice thing, and I think I'm glad you brought it up, Commissioner Hansberger, is going to be where there's going to be a lot of pushback, I think, if we don't have these exceptions, and because it's only 8%, it's minute. So I think from a political standpoint, to get this through City Council, I am going to be in favor of this, even though I agree with a lot of what everybody's saying. Just because, you know, seeing how things work, getting this done, and then maybe another revision comes where the other things that people are talking about gets addressed. But because this went through so many meetings with stakeholders and everybody, and some of the exceptions are actually practical, that I'm going to be in favor of for those reasons. Thanks.
Commissioner Kramer?
Yeah, thank you for everybody's thoughts. This is a really thoughtful discussion. I appreciate it, hearing all these perspectives. I just wanted kind of throwing out the numbers and the percentages and saying, well, 8% isn't very much of the total gas usage for a home. So it's, you know, inconsequential. Well, the whole purpose of this ordinance is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions to help mitigate the climate crisis. So methane, you know, we call it natural gas, it's methane, is a super potent climate warmer. It has, you know, between 20 and 80 times the climate warming potential of CO2. So 8% of that's not really a very scientifically valid number to throw out if we're thinking about climate impacts here. So if we have the opportunity to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions in a more rigorous way to meet our climate action goals, I think we should explore those options. This is just for new builds. This is not for old homes that still, you know, have fireplaces in their homes. This is just for new builds. And this is for people that will know before they buy a home, before they build a home, what the rules are. You know, everybody wants to live in Encinitas. This is not going to deter people from living or buying a home in Encinitas. The accessory dwelling units, we have so many going up in our neighborhood. They're all Airbnbs. It's not creating new homes for residents. So that's my experience with the ADUs. So I don't think that's going to limit, you know, available housing for residents by, you know, mandating electrification of ADUs. So those are my 2 points. I think we could still refine these exceptions. I do see some justifications for them now that they've been explained, but I don't think they've been adequately targeted and narrowed and justified in the ordinance as is. You know, that's my opinion at this stage.
Commissioner Novi, if you don't mind, could I just make one minor point of clarification? Just so natural gas is mostly methane, but when it combusts in all of our appliances, the emissions that it emits is actually CO2. So it's not the methane that goes into the air, it's CO2. So it's not, even though it's methane, it's not as, what's being emitted is not as potent as its original source, if that makes sense. There is some methane leakage from the natural gas pipelines. However, there's been studies done on that in the past, and that leakage is very minimal, and so minimal that we don't even include it in our climate action plan calculations. So I just want to make that small point of clarification.
Any other comments or questions from commissioners?
So
Crystal, do you oh, sorry. I just
one quick thing. I'd also be, you know, probably in favor if one of the commissioners wanted to propose something with limiting one of the exceptions. So I'm all about moving this forward. So.
Thanks, Commissioner Adams. Crystal, I did want to ask, do you have a slide, or are you able to provide us the, you know, more data on foregone carbon dioxide reductions, you know, based on, you know, per exemption? You're muted.
I can hear you.
Still muted.
Sorry, I'm in my own head over here. Let me share. It's this.
Well, I do just want to make the point that even if these are exceptions, it doesn't mean every ADU is going to be gas plumbed or every new house. You know what I mean? These are just exceptions, but it doesn't mean that everybody's going to do these, correct? I mean, they can still do electric if they want.
Sorry, I only heard part of your question. Can you repeat it if it were to me? Sorry.
No, I think that Commissioner Novi was just saying, what is the percentage? Isn't that what you were asking, Commissioner Novi? Like, what is the percentage going to impact? But I think my point was also that even though you're providing these exceptions, it doesn't mean that the homeowner is going to do them, right? They could still do all electric appliances. They could choose to put in the electric is all I was saying.
Yeah, I think that's a fair statement, but I think that we could calculate what's a maximum, foregone greenhouse gas emission reduction. Although you're right, it might in fact be lower than that because some people would voluntarily do things that they don't have to do.
So can you see this pie chart on my screen?
Yes.
Okay, so this is for, thanks to Epic for putting this together. This was when we were kind of analyzing the exceptions and what benefits that they, don't realize. So this is for residential, and this is a pie chart of the proportion of natural gas usage from, and in this sense, you can essentially equate natural gas usage with greenhouse gas emissions because what it's emitting is CO2. So, and that's what we measure greenhouse gas emissions is metric tons of CO2. So, so water heating is one for residential is one thing we are eliminating, at least for single family. And then space heating is another one that we're eliminating. And then the remainder is here, the pool heating, the range. We are also eliminating the dryer. So adding all this up, I think it gets to 85% or something like that, close to that, for what we're reducing the emissions by, for what the exceptions are being proposed. And then if I can jump down to, that's residential again, just shown in a different way. And then I'll look for the commercial one. Or here's multifamily residential. Let me just make this smaller so you can see it all. This is the same thing that I had in the slide. So this shows a comparison of, or it shows the difference between the blue is the proportion of multifamily residential that would have exceptions, and then the green is what would be required to be electric. And you can see the proportions there. Excuse me. Over on the exceptions, there's 52% plus 8 plus 4, so it would be a total of 64% that you would still be emitting, but you would be saving 36% on what would be required as it's currently written.
So there'd be an additional 64% if the exception wasn't there?
Yeah, you could.
Those exceptions were.
Yeah, if there were no exceptions. Yeah.
And am I correct in understanding that water heating, the 52%, that is 50%, 2% of the use. And if that were not an exception, we would add 52%.
To the other side, yeah.
Yep.
But to Commissioner Hansberger's point, that would be if all new multifamilies installed gas instead of electric.
Yeah, I'm not sure if we have it bifurcated down so far as to separate out low rise and high rise. Epic, do you know that figure?
Wait, I thought that all new homes had to put in electric water heater. That's not one of the exceptions, is correct? Isn't that only for apartment buildings? Correct. So residential, okay. So now you're showing, I'm just just want to clarify. Back at the single family home was above, and you said that they were going to be saving 85%, correct? It was only the exceptions for single family homes was just 15%.
Yeah.
Correct. Now we're at apartment buildings down here, right?
I'm
And
showing
so
on the screen is for apartments. Yeah, multifamily.
And Crystal, just to chime in here, no, we don't have it broken down any further than this. And you know, one other kind of point of clarification is this isn't an increase of emissions. It's just a lower decrease of emissions. I know that's a kind of a wonky point, but this is not gonna, nothing here is gonna increase the emissions in the city of Encinitas.
Yeah, no, I get that.
I have one unrelated question, which is that the last time this topic came up, when former Commissioner Wong brought it up as a standalone, not through the commission, not through this vehicle, we had a lot of opposition from the SDG&E union. And I'm curious if they have given input at this point in this process so far.
Good question.
Yeah, I can speak to that. I actually reached out to our SDG&E representative this week and made sure that he was aware of this ordinance coming to Environmental Commission and the process that we've been working on, and encouraged him to provide comment. And thus far, I don't think that he has. So yeah, I guess that's where that stands. And then on the flip side, I know, SDG&E is a fairly large organization, and they have, a bunch of different departments, and they actually do have one department that works on supporting cities reach codes. And that team has actually been working with us, and they actually provided a very helpful review of the ordinance that we were able to kind of make some clarifications to some of the terms, and that was very beneficial. So that's the extent of my outreach and interaction with SDG&E along this process.
Can I real quick, Commissioner Novi? So, for the new commissioners that weren't here for that meeting, just so you know, that was the most attended meeting I've ever seen. And it was basically Commissioner Wong brought this to the table. It was a resolution to do this, and SDG&E had 2 or 3 people there. There were at least 2 unions, maybe 3, with 2 or 3 representatives. Some of them had 5 or 6. A lot of opposition, and if we have a lot less opposition at this meeting. I don't know if it's because of the exceptions or why, but that's where I'm coming from when I say if this can get through like this, I'm okay with it. So just to give you some context.
Hey, can I ask one more question of Crystal, if possible? When you were presenting, somebody was saying, I think you were presenting there was an exception for compliance with solar panels if your house was completely, did I misunderstand that? Could you just explain that one more time? I think I was confused by that.
That might have been on one of Joe's slides. Joe, can you maybe run through the exceptions for the solar PV portion of the ordinance?
Yeah, I'm mute, Joe.
Sorry, I was muted again. Are you talking about only how, if you have a higher green tariff? Or are you talking about all the exceptions for non-residential?
I think she's referring to the tariff.
Right. So
I think so.
Yeah.
So the idea being is that if you are already supplying your load with 100% renewable energy, either through SDCP or through the San Diego Gas Electric offering, or because we're dealing with commercial customers, an electric service provider under the direct access program, then what's the purpose of having, from an emission standpoint, what's the purpose of having rooftop PV as a mandate? So that's the idea behind it. And because the city of Encinitas has chosen to enroll everybody at 100% renewable energy content. That's kind of the basis of where that came from. So they can still put PV on if they don't want to, if they don't want to be on that higher tariff, or even if they're on the higher tariff, they can still put it on, because there are cost savings associated with PV under the net energy metering, which is changing. We don't know what the PUC is going to do with it, but SDCP appears to be holding strong in terms of NIM offerings, and so those cost savings should remain. So that's, it gives, you talked a lot about choice. This gives people choice about how to comply, and using the existing things that they didn't have access to, before SDCP came into existence. Now it's a viable option for them.
And that's for residential and commercial?
No, it's only for non-residential. So residential under Title 24 now, if it's new low-rise residential, they have to put PV on.
Yeah, that's a statewide requirement.
And then there's a lot of issues with how you do it for multifamily residential, like how you allocate the benefits. And there's a mechanism for doing it, but things can get very complicated. So the cap was focused on residential and non-residential, and this is where where the path has led us at this point.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? I'll just sort of weigh in and say that I think this is, I also applaud the work of Crystal and the staff and consultants. I think one thing we really should make sure to recognize is that, the climate action plan has, specific goals for this program. And I think we saw, evidence that this strategy meets those goals. And so I think it's important to recognize that the controlling policy that this is being done under does, create specific goals, and that this does meet that. I also think it's completely legitimate, in light of declaring climate emergencies and all of the public comments we're getting, to think about how to go above and beyond those goals. I also agree very, very much with Commissioner Adams, that it is surprising that we're not getting as much resistance right now as we had, previous times that this came up, and that may indicate a window where maybe it makes sense to get this in front of the council, as quickly as possible. And so I certainly have reservations about this this commission holding it up, for too long. So I think we have a couple of options here. I think, I would be satisfied personally to let this move forward with a couple of provisions. I'll just throw this out there and suggest and see how people feel. One would be to present the exemption for multifamily with somehow parsed. I think it's a really good point that was made earlier by Commissioner Kramer and others, that that's all lumped together. And Commissioner Morrison, did indicate, and I'm sorry if I'm putting words in his mouth, and you can certainly correct me if I'm wrong, but did indicate that at least certain kinds of low-rise multifamily are designed, with individual water heaters in each unit, and it's not exactly clear why they couldn't be electric. Certainly there may be certain kinds of high-rise or larger, areas where it is, it's more challenging to do that. So I do think that if it moves forward, it would be good for the council to have that spelled out, a little bit clearer, so that it could be considered more strongly by the council. And then I would also, I would be happier if the council was looking at this, and when they're looking at the exemptions, if it was possible to calculate, again, it's the foregone greenhouse gas savings. I know they're not increases, but the foregone greenhouse gas savings associated with each of those, so that there's really a quantitative and scientific way to sort of argue the trade-offs that are there, rather than kind of hand waving, sort of low percentage values. And I think I would be willing to allow that to go forward to the council, rather than asking for staff to do that work and come back to us. But if they were willing to do that work before it got to the council, so that the council could have that information and the public could see that information in order to make comments before it went up for council review. So that's my suggestion for a possible compromise approach to move it forward. I'm not making the motion for that at the moment, so maybe I'll just sort of throw that out there and see if there's any comments, from you all, if that might be a path forward.
I like that, Ari. And I agree that the majority of this is in the right direction. We need to, get our goals. It's not perfect, but, we do have a window to move it forward. And with those comments that you just made, I think I could support that.
Agreed.
I think that is a good path forward, Chair Novi. Just parsing out the low-rise and high-rise multifamily units seems like a good justified modification. I still have a little bit of reluctance about the ADUs, but that could maybe be something that council can consider. I also was presented the ideas of the rebates for the high efficiency electric appliances and sort of strengthening that rebate system for the cooking units for new residences would be great. I'm not sure, is that part of the ordinance? I'm not sure if I understood that correctly.
It's actually not. It's something that staff can do without, we've already have funding allocated to do the Green Building Incentive Program. So that's more of a programmatic change that doesn't require council action. So we wanted to share that just so that you knew that we were hearing that from the public and that we were going to make that change in order to promote these more voluntary changes in terms of reducing emissions.
Okay, great, sure. That seems like a really great idea. So I think I could support this compromise that has been proposed. Thank you for the discussion, everyone.
So I guess anybody else want to say anything? Okay, so I'll make a motion. Well, first of all, let me ask Crystal and staff, what we're talking about in terms of parsing the multifamily homes, and I think we could add to it the parsing of the add-on and freestanding ADUs, as well as doing a quantification of greenhouse gas emission savings forgone with each of the exemptions. Is that something that's technically feasible, to put together with a reasonable degree of certainty?
Yeah, I think that sounds reasonable, and maybe we'll check with EPIC as well.
Yeah, I think it is, Crystal. Certainly the greenhouse gas reduction or the changes to the greenhouse gas implications is relatively easy. So I think, it may be, the ADU will be any forward-looking estimate is going to be just that, an estimate. We don't know how many ADUs are coming in. We don't know how many are going to be which, but looking at historic data, we can probably come up with some estimate. And I would say on the multifamily, that one might be a little easier as well because it's we'd have to come up with a delineation, but I think we could use existing code to figure that out. So long story short, I think those are reasonable things to do in a relatively short time.
Okay, well, that's good to hear. So I'll move forward and make a motion that we approve. Let me see if I can get this right. We're going to approve the draft ordinance, recommending it to council with the following addenda. One, that multifamily housing is parsed into low rise or high rise in a way that makes sense according to code and for the purpose of water heating. That ADUs are parsed to freestanding and within the footprint of the existing house in the same way, and that those distinctions are clearly presented to council. And then for all exemptions to the ordinance, that a quantification of foregone greenhouse gas emissions is provided along with those exemptions, so that there can be a quantifiable discussion around the trade-offs associated with each.
And just so that I understand clearly, our Chair Novi, so for multifamily low rise, you want that to be no exception for multifamily low rise. And so that you want the exception to only be applicable to multifamily high rise. Is that correct?
I don't need to make that distinction. I think I want the council to be aware that they could choose to make it that way. You know, and that there should be, like with everything else, we should put some kind of a greenhouse gas emission you know, reduction number on a decision to parse that way, and you know, unexempt or make not exempt low rise. You know,
you're not suggesting that as a revision. You're just suggesting that we analyze and calculate out and show the emissions parsed out, like you were
on each of those, and make clear to the council that they could choose to extend or to remove the exemption from a subset of the multi-family housing.
Got it.
That's my feeling. Is any of the other commissioners, did they want to be more aggressive?
Well, I just had a question. Wasn't the only exemption for the multi-family housing, wasn't the exemption just electric water heating versus gas water heating, Crystal? Is that all we're talking about? So I think what Chair Novi was saying was that the multi-family single story would be expected to do electric water heating. Is that the exemption, or am I misunderstanding that?
That's not what I'm saying. I'm not recommending
okay.
that I'm not recommending that we propose to change the ordinance to not exempt the low rise multi because we don't have the information, I feel right now, to know how much of a bite out of the apple that would be. So I'm willing to let it go forward if all of that information, you know, the fact that it can be parsed that way, and a quantification of how much additional greenhouse gas savings would occur if that were to happen, is presented to the council.
Okay, and then I feel like you also added something I hadn't heard before with the ADUs. So I'm not comfortable taking the exemption away from the ADUs.
We are not, again, this motion does not remove any exemptions. It simply asks that that a quantification of you know, is attempted for what would be the greenhouse gas emissions reduced if freestanding ADUs were considered differently from attached ADUs. So we're not removing the exemption. We're just trying to add more information into the process for when the council deals with it.
Okay, so Crystal, are you guys going to look and see how many ADUs that have been built electric versus gas? Because I feel like, again, that's kind of, it's a lot of guesswork, right? Because you don't know if we have 50 ADUs that go up, maybe 25 will actually choose to be all electric, right? So again, it just, I'm just saying, I'm just asking for how you're going to quantify that. It seems a little
we may
tricky.
not you're right. We may not be able to get to that level where we guess what they might choose to do in terms of electrification, but we could give an estimate of the anticipated potential number of ADUs that we may see. I think it would be a rough guess, because ADU is, again, even just choosing to build an ADU is a voluntary thing, whereas with the on the housing side, the multifamily, we have predictions based on our housing elements and our land use of where multifamily is going to go. So that's easier to determine. The ADUs, a little more difficult, but I think it's doable based on what Scott Anders explained.
And we,
okay, thank you.
like Mr. Anders mentioned, just using historical data, you could maybe just assume that the proportion that are currently all electric will continue to be all electric or based on the gas hookups of the main unit, or probably ADUs will probably just go with whatever the main unit is if they're attached, right? But for the unattached, we might not know. But
yeah, and it's just information. I mean, so Commissioner Hansweiger, the information may prove your point. I mean, if it turns out that there's a fair amount of uptake of electric only ADUs without any mandate, that strengthens the argument to not have a mandate there. So.
May we have a clarification of the motion?
Sure, let me try to say it again.
I can help you out. I have it written down. I could take a stab at it, but you can go ahead if you'd like to.
No, if you've got it written down, please.
Okay, so the first one is to detail the emissions for multifamily, low rise and high rise. Quantify the ADU exemptions for detached ADUs and quantify the exemption percentages in detail.
I don't think that's exactly right. Let me try to restate it. And I'm sure it's my fault that it's not right. So maybe the first thing that we should say is that we would like to quantify the greenhouse gas emissions foregone, the greenhouse gas reductions foregone by all exemptions that are in here, right? Just have that list and an estimate as best as can be achieved. And then to further to separate in multifamily, a category of multifamily housing that's low rise or something similar from high rise, and let them just pull that out as a possibility. And then the same thing with ADUs, where you're creating two categories of ADUs, attached and freestanding, and reporting those numbers for all of those potential exemptions.
So it sounds like there's no change to the actual ordinance, just other than more detailed explanations.
That's exactly right.
Perfect. And do we have a second on this motion?
I would just like to add one thing that might be useful for a council, since they might not understand why we're parsing these things out more finely. Is it possible to add in there that just, as stated by representative from multi-unit or multifamily developer, that gas heating is not as logistically complicated for a single level multifamily unit, whereas for a multi-level multifamily unit, gas heating is more logistically complicated and more expensive. So kind of just, that was one thing that I felt was missing from the ordinance was, we didn't have enough information to really make a choice about why these exemptions may or may not be justified economically and environmentally. The council might have similar issues too. So I think it might be helpful to explain why we're parsing those out. And similar for the ADUs, for an attached ADU, it might be more burdensome for the homeowner to have to go all electric if they're wanting to hook up to the gas lines of their existing home that's attached to the ADU, whereas a freestanding ADU, that that burden might not be there, something like that.
Commission Secretary Meadow, may we have a motion to extend the meeting? It's now 7:30.
So moved. Anybody second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, we'll extend. I think Commissioner Morrison would like to say something.
I don't have a problem thank you. As the multifamily representative on the stakeholder group, I don't have a problem with us specifically saying the single story multifamily units could or should be electric. If we need to add that into the motion at all, I don't have any problem with that, because that doesn't really bite into the efficiency when you go higher stories and you have more circulation. Just throw that in.
That's great information. So let me remove. let's remove here then. So we'll say, so the motion is now to amend the ordinance to not exempt single-story multifamily housing from the electrified water heating requirement.
And then by single story, I just want to clarify that the term is typically low rise. Are you okay saying low rise? Okay.
Thank you. Low rise. And so that's the only substantive change to the ordinance itself in the motion. And then the rest of the motion would be to separate attached and detached ADUs for the purpose of trying to quantify, greenhouse gas emissions reduction loss. And then along with that, to give a quantification of foregone greenhouse gas reduction in all of the exemption categories.
I'll second it.
Do we have any further discussion? Okay, all in favor? I'm an aye.
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 Any opposed? Good. Well, that was a really wonderful, fruitful, and detailed discussion, and I think we all did a really nice job of reflecting a bunch of different viewpoints and yet moving forward a really important component of the climate action plan that's complicated and necessary to keep moving forward in the system. So thank you all for that, and I'm sorry that we took so much time on this item. So let's also thank Crystal and Epic and Mark. Mark was here. You know, we know there's a lot of people on the city side of this that put something like this together, and thank you so much for your hard work and helping us move through this.
Good job, everyone.
Hearing it, and thank you guys very much.
And we should really also very much thank Commissioner Morrison and Commissioner Adams, who were directly engaged in the stakeholder process. And it's really a great benefit to the commission when commissioners have that level of detailed knowledge as we try to move it through our body. So thank you so much. Okay, let's move on to action item 8B. And I think that's going to be Eric.
You guys see my screen?
Yes, we can.
All right. I will echo some of those sentiments. That was a very robust and well-developed conversation on that item. So it was well played. So I just have some really more housekeeping type of thing. So this is our standing item on the Environmental Commission work plan. This is the June 2021 update. I'll just go through it real quick, just as a reminder. This is our standing monthly item. We go through any updates for that particular month are captured in red. And this is an action item. So we all come to consensus, or the commission comes to consensus on what's being captured here, and it carries from month to month. So on the environmental policy side, so the city council did adopt. Yep.
Eric, it disappeared from my screen.
You switched screens.
Yeah, same here.
Oh.
We have the blue screen.
Sorry, I'm new at this Zoom thing. It just it's this new thing they're doing.
There we go.
So is it back? We're good?
Back. Okay.
So on the environmental policy side, the city council adopted the proposed updates to the city of Encinitas environmental policy C025 on June 3rd, 2021. So that was an effort that was taken on by this commission and has since landed. So the city council adopted those proposed updates. So that's a big accomplishment. On the CCE side, as we'll all recall, the San Diego Community Power provided an informational item to the commission and the public at the May 13th, 2020 Environmental Commission meeting. That was last month. On the plastic pollution side, it was on May 13th. The subcommittee received approval from the Environmental Commission on a recommendation of the City Council to adopt a resolution and ordinance to ban the sale, use, and release of all lighter than air balloons in Encinitas. So that is something that I am working on. And that's pretty much it. I just added a date on this divestment strategies. I do have an update on that. We won't include it, but we may be bringing that. We're targeting June 23rd, but I will make that a formal update next month. So those are the updates for this month. If there's any questions, comments, I'll turn it over to you.
Can I just add one, Eric, on vegetation? Do we still have a vegetation one? I think we do.
Yeah, right here.
Yeah, so I'm sitting on the county's action team to develop a native plant policy for the county. And now council member Lyons is also on there, and you know, we're going to be looking very closely at what the county does to see what can be brought back to Encinitas, because whatever the county does will not, Encinitas will not be impacted, because we're obviously not we're in an incorporated area of the county.
Okay, great. So any motion to approve the work plan would include a brief update of that. We would capture that next month.
Thank you. Anybody else have any updates that were missed? Okay, so I'll move to approve the work plan as amended. Anybody second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed?
Aye.
Okay, we're good. Thank you, Eric.
You're welcome.
Okay, 8C, annual selection of chair and vice chair. Eric.
Yes, well, I'm probably just going to turn this right back over to you. So the commission is set up. Encinitas Municipal Code, Chapter 22.49, establishes the commission. Part of that municipal code defines that a chair and a vice chair would serve 1-year terms. So we are at that point. So we are open to, I will turn it over to Commission Chair, current Commission Chair Novi, to kind of lead the discussion amongst the group. If there's any desire to take on over a chair position or a vice chair position, or someone wants to make a motion, it's just an open discussion amongst the commission. I will not be a part of it. So I will turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. And so I'll just start by saying, I think this commission, has had a longstanding tradition, we could call it, of having no conversation about this topic before this meeting happens. So to my knowledge, there's been no discussion of who does or doesn't want to be in any chair roles. My personal feeling is that, I'm always happy to step aside if somebody else wants to be chair. And so I'm happy to continue, but if anybody really wants it, I'm also happy to relinquish. Maybe Vice Chair Adams, do you want to say kind of where you are on the topic?
Same, echoes sentiments. Although I think you've done a great job as chair, and I think serving 2 years would be, I'm all about spirit of rotation, but I think serving 2 years for you, I think that would be what I would suggest and recommend.
Well, that's very kind. Well, let's give anyone else, would anybody like to take over chair or vice chair? We're certainly open to it. Okay, hearing none. Commissioner Adams, are you willing to remain as vice chair?
Yes.
Okay, so then I guess I'll make a motion for myself as chair and Commissioner Adams as vice chair. Would anybody like to second?
I'll second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, that was easy. Thank you. I'm happy to do it.
Thank you.
Okay, so now we are on 8D, establishment of the work plan subcommittee.
You got it. So again, just kind of another housekeeping thing. So as you know, as part of the establishment of the commission brings forward a work plan to the city council each year. The current work plan was adopted in September 16th of 2020. So just now kind of building up towards that next update, it's anticipated for September of 2021. The kind of practice of the commission over the last few years, and it seems to have worked really well, is to establish a subcommittee that kind of works on a draft of the work plan and pulls that all together and then presents that to the commission. The commission can then update that or provide input or change it or add their input at that time. Ultimately, it gets approved by the commission, and then we'll bring it forward to the city council for their final adoption. So last year, and forgive me, I believe it was Commissioner Novi, Bisconner, and Carol Wolf. I believe Wolf was on last year. It's open game. It is a good process, to really kind of hone in on what the commission is working on from year to year, make any modifications, bring in new initiatives if that so is the desire. A lot of times, if there's something that the council has expressed interest in, I can usually put that into the process as well. So I'm going to turn it over to all of you for discussion, but that's the genesis of this item tonight.
Thanks, Eric. And I would agree, having sat on the subcommittee, I think for the last 3 years, it's really a good opportunity. And I think it makes a lot of sense for the subcommittee to have at least one new commissioner, because it's a great way to really get a hold of what we're trying to do. So it's really a very pleasant process. You just kind of have a meeting, with the commission, with the subcommittee and Eric, and kind of look through last year's and, think about what changes, and then bring that to the full commission, and everybody talks about it, and we just make it all work, and then it goes to the council for approval. So would anybody like to be on this? Commissioner Morrison?
Yes, please.
All right, we got one person. Anybody else?
I'd be happy to as well.
Who was that? Commissioner Kramer?
Yes.
Okay. Commissioner Crainer. So then I would suggest that the third person be either myself or Commissioner Pisciner. I think it's good to have somebody who's done it before. So Inga, are you interested in doing it?
I'd be happy to do it if you don't want to do it, Chair Noby. I thought you provided great leadership on this last year. So if you're willing, I would suggest that you lead it again.
Okay, I'm happy to do it. Next year you have to do it though. Okay, so I'll make a motion for myself, Commissioner Marson and Commissioner Kramer to comprise a subcommittee to develop our next work plan. Can I get a second?
Second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, great. Thank you all so much, especially those who are going to help out with this. It's fun. Okay, we have no commissioner initiated agenda items. Would anybody like to make an update on an item of interest or an announcement? Okay, hearing none. Any future commissioner initiated agenda items? Okay, well then let's adjourn and thank you all for another incredibly productive and wonderful meeting.
Great meeting, everyone.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.
Night. Good night.